David, is Jack right or wrong here?
Well, I respect him for what he's saying because he's at least trying to come up with some sort of consistency. But I know there are plenty of people who've been criticizing Twitter in the last day for focusing more on being consistent in that way when it's a very big public person like Alex Jones, and not being as consistent when it comes to the myriad infractions of their rules that happen every day, some of which they take down and some of which they don't. But, we're really at a weird point in the history of these platforms, which is that, they've become such a miasma of conflicting behaviors and an absolute lack of governmental oversight and regulation and law. And they're all sort of struggling with the question of, are we media or are we not? And Twitter is at least Jack's position is, Twitter is not media. Twitter is a neutral platform. Therefore, it is not our role to determine what people say or don't say, as long as they're not, actively harassing someone or something like that. I respect that.
That said, he moves the ball forward by shifting the work to journalists, though he's saying he's not trying to do that. He says accounts like Jones can often sensationalize issues and spread unsubstantiated rumors. So it's critical that journalists document, validate, and refute such information directly so people can form their own opinions. This is what serves the public conversation best. We don't mean to shift the work here. We must build tools to help and need to work together to do that. We can't be a useful service without the integrity journalists bring. Meantime, journalists have responded to this. You've got the LA Times journalist Matt Pierce saying, "I'm not getting paid to clean up your website for you." Alistair, are we getting paid to clean up Twitter for Jack Dorsey?
I think we're getting paid to clean up and keep public discourse factual. That's, I hope, what we come in every morning to do. I think one of the classic arguments that not just Twitter makes is, if there's something that's out there that's wrong on the internet, other people have to get out there and say what's right and make it clear so that they can use that content to refute what was wrong before. Those tech companies always say that type of thing, and I think that has some validity. And I think Jack is also trying to avoid falling into a trap which Twitter's fallen into a lot with conservative commentators on Twitter over the last year or so. They basically say, "Oh, you're limiting our free speech. It's a First Amendment issue, and you shouldn't be allowed to do that." With this decision so far, he's taking the opposite tack, which is, carry on. And he's basically saying, maybe not just journalists, but he's saying, everyone else on Twitter, if you feel strongly about it, get on Twitter and refute what he's saying.
That said, Twitter has made many mistakes over the years, not making it clear what the rules actually are, then being capricious about how they enforce them. And there's certainly an argument to be made that if Alex Jones doesn't violate the rules, that maybe there's a problem with the rules. Emily Horn, who's the former head of communications at Twitter, actually hit back at Jack, saying, "I think it's the wrong call. Jones's behavior isn't a one-off. Twitter started examining offline behavior as a factor in verification last fall. If your policy doesn't account for Jones-like activity on or offline, then the policy isn't serving a healthy conversation." She adds, "Designing scalable policy on this is incredibly hard. No company will always get it right, but this is an opportunity to take a stand and commit to making and enforcing hard choices in service of promoting healthy conversation. I hope you revisit this decision." David, what do you make of her argument?
I just think it's so weird that we're in this position where these for-profit companies are basically in the position of policing the public square. They were never really set up to have the capability to do that. They do, in the case of Twitter and Facebook, have their terms of service and all that. And, Jack thinks he's doing as good a job as he can do. But it's true that all of these companies swing back and forth like a pendulum, or twist themselves like a pretzel, or whatever metaphor you want to use, and do not show consistency because they're being confronted every day by new kinds of situations which they never really anticipated. And particularly in Twitter's case, they're not profitable enough, like Facebook is, to basically throw any kind of money at any problem they might encounter. So they have to kind of tread a cautious line. And then you have this very interesting point that Alistair pointed out about, conservative bias or non-bias, and how they're trying to thread that needle. I mean, I feel for these companies, but I feel for Twitter more than I feel for Facebook, because I actually think Facebook has handled it much more poorly than Twitter in reality.
Now, Alistair, Jack talks about them needing to create better economic incentives to prevent this kind of behavior. Former Twitter CEO Dick Costolo has also talked about these things. But what kinds of incentives, economic incentives, would prevent this kind of behavior? I mean, not to mention the fact that this is a private company that's entitled to create its own rules about what it does or doesn't want to allow.
There's already an example of an incentive. I don't think it's working very well right now, but PolitiFact and fact-checking groups like that on Google Search and also on Facebook, there's some financial incentives for those organizations to go out and fact-check scurrilous stuff that's on Twitter and other platforms. So he might be referring to that. Other than that, I would say subscribe to your local newspaper. David,
what do you think Twitter needs to do better here?
Jeez. Well, I do think, again, one of the reasons I respect Jack is even in putting out the statement that you quoted from, he's trying to articulate something which, granted, he hasn't stuck with very well and the company hasn't stuck with historically that well. But I think all of the companies need to be more candid with the public, that they understand they are in an unprecedented situation that they can't even fully manage and they need help. So, when he asks for journalists to help him, maybe he's not turning to the right places, but they do need to turn to the outside for help. I frankly think government needs to come in and establish some ground rules of what is and is not allowed on these platforms to take a little bit of the burden off the commercial players from making these sometimes impossible decisions.